Today we are going to take a look at 5 red flags that you should be careful when you are producing your track. Let's hop in and let's take a look at what those flags are. The first one is what I call the dead low end. That means that your low end is either overcompressed or it really doesn't have anything interesting in it, so it's not really catching the attention of the listeners. So let me give some examples to make it a bit clear for you. The first one is, for example, from a techno track. Let's say you are going for rumble kick, something like this. The first thing that I want to show you is the spectrum. Take a look at the movement of the spectrum. So we won't see any movement. The spectrum just follows the kick, and when the kick hits, we see the movement up and kick goes down and movement goes down. When you listen to the more professional tracks like from the UMEC or other main room techno artists that are really top of their game, you will hear instead something like this. Let me give an example. You definitely feel like this is much cleaner than the other one. And let's go to the master and take a look at the spectrum. We definitely see the thumb of the kick here, but then we have some type of rumble going around here. And then we have something on the high end with the kick and the other clicks in the track and some noise here. So it is having this kind of dynamic movement, like kicks goes up and rumble goes up, and then some other things happening on the down and up as well. One more time, take a look. Really cool. Let me make it even easier for you to see the here difference. Now I'm gonna A/B two of them. Let's say this is a techno and you are more interested in like a deep house or progressive house, a bit more like a melodic genres. So I prepared also another example to help you how it can sound. This track is called Head and Heart. I just took the low end of that track. In the original track, it sounds like this. The first thing that you should be aware of that the kick and the sub, how dynamic they are. When the kick hits, we are ducking the sub, and then sub comes back and the kick disappears. So let me make it a bit easier for you, kick and sub, like this. You can definitely feel it. The other thing is the distribution of the notes. Even though there are notes exactly at the same point where the kick hits, but the most of the notes are actually offbeat, so they are trying to avoid the kick. And of course you cannot always avoid it because of if you want to create a melody, but you can easily solve it having different layers. For example, a bit higher layer, you duck a bit less so that you can hear even though kick hits. And then some transient and so on make the low end much more interesting. What do I see with the beginners tracks? Oftentimes the compression, sidechain the kick, and respecting the spaces of different elements are lacking. What does that mean? For example, if you play the kick and sub, then suddenly it sounds like this. Again, I took off the sidechain so that the kick hits, the sub hits at the same time. The other thing is the distribution. Like you see that this time we are actually playing more sub bass when the kick hits rather than trying to utilize the offbeat. And this creates this kind of dun 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 dun, really almost like an anthem sound or the melody. Let me make it clear for you, easier for you with the adding with the body. Take a look again. How the original was sounding. The difference between these two, the sound, selection, everything is same. The only difference is how you sidechain everything plus how you place the notes. And this is a very common mistake. Sorry for interruption, but I have a small announcement. This video is sponsored by Skillshare, and Skillshare is an online learning community where you can find hundreds of thousands of different inspiring classes. For example, for me at the moment, I am taking a class with the Premiere Pro and Photoshop. I have already followed a couple of the lessons, both in the Premiere Pro and Photoshop, and some of you already actually realized that my lighting game and my maybe thumbnail game changed slightly lately, simply because I can a bit more so that I can spend a bit more time on those things. And why Skillshare and not YouTube videos? The main difference is, of course, you don't have the YouTube ads so that you can focus on a bit more. And the most important thing is basically the structure of the classes so that you can find all the exercises, you can find the material that you can go through. For example, for my case, I have the pictures or brushes and that I can play through, or I can do the similar exercises that is made in the Premiere Pro and so on. So it was quite straightforward, and you really avoid this kind of trying to search for videos all the time. And other than that, first 1,000 of my subscriber who clicks the link below will get a free premium membership, so you can try it out for free and explore how it works. But let's continue now. The second most common mistake is not really processing the time elements, reverbs, delays, this type of things. That oftentimes comes with not really utilizing the returns. Because when you don't use return, if you have a lot of inserts, it's really hard to process them together, because then you have to add the EQ to every insert in every channel, for example. So I have two examples here. The first one is being the bed example. In the bed example, we are not utilizing any of these returns, but what we do, we are adding the reverbs and delays on each group or each instrument, and oftentimes we have these long tails which drone the sound itself. For example, if you add it to the hat, sounds like this. When you listen to it like the single element like this, the bigger reverbs oftentimes sounds better because we really enjoy this lush sound of the reverb. It's exactly what's happening here. When I take off the, for example, reverb and delay, it's really bad and boring, and it's easier to make that mistake. The problem here is that you start to exaggerate it because everything sounds better with the reverb oftentimes, most of the time. And here, for example, you use another reverb on percussions. It's like a magical button, makes everything immediately better. And then once you go in this way and do everything together, you end up with the result sounding like this. By the way, this is a track from Christian Löffer, an artist that I have mad respect for. Really great track, by the way. The second one, instead utilizing out of effects, we are using most of the returns here. And in the returns, because we are sending out of elements, first it glues everything together. The things start to sit in the same area. Plus, now I can actually, for example, add a bit brightness if I need to the track. For example, here, if I solve the reverb, I feel like this was a bit boxy, a bit muddy. What I did, just go to reverb, take off a little bit of those things. Immediately brings up the air in the track without really doing so many EQs. If you think again, if I try to do this with each insert, I have to go one by one. The other thing that's missing is that they don't process the reverbs and delays. They're very naked, very clean sounding. So here, for example, I'm utilizing overdrive to make the room reverb a bit like a distorted. Gives a lot of air and a lot of this brightness to the sound. Let's go to an A/B, start that so that you can hear side by side how they sound. By the way, this track, I have a full tutorial on it. If you want to take a look at that, I will add it here so that you can go there and take a look if you want to. So next on the list is really flat composition. And this is one of the things that I can kind of understand the level of the producer straight ahead. Flat composition means that oftentimes you keep the energy levels very linear. So you start maybe in the beginning very clean and low energy and you gradually build it, but in between there's no energy changes at all. So you have this linear formation of the track. I have an example. This is coming from my Boris Brejcha 3 levels of Boris Brejcha tutorial. I talk a bit in detail there, but one of the things that I discussed there was like this pro level where things are a bit more linear and compared to what Brejcha has. For example, you have a composition like this. What I'm gonna do, just gonna move around and you will hear how the energy is developing, but there's not really too much change. So this change here is just flat, like we are adding shakers, we are adding layers, we are just adding, nothing happens in between. This creates kind of a flat composition. This is a bit abstract to talk about because it's really hard to explain. So now I'm going to switch to the Boris version of it and we take a look how things evolve in that track. What happens if you take a look at, for example, tracks like Boris Brejcha, that you always see that this linearity is always breaking down. Like there are things going back and forward all the time. We don't hear this linear energy development. We see the energy development, but the linearity is breaking down. It goes up and down even though we continuously going up. What I mean by that, for example, this is a part from that track. I think it was like around 2 minutes mark. The length of the part that I'm going to play is around like 45 seconds. But see how much we actually go 0 to top and then reset the track so that we get this like a minute of small climax and go down again. Let me play you. Especially take a look at what happens in between here and here. First reset. Extras. The one thing that's really interesting is that we are here, like everything is up, and in 6 seconds we are resetting the track, and when we return back there is a really smooth transition, like from here to here. It's just 6 seconds around or 10 seconds, whatever it is, and suddenly transition happens when we don't even understand what is happening, and then we are okay. We don't feel the transition that much. And what I try to mean by that, for example, the flat composition is like don't be really scared taking off the elements in your track. Don't be like just adding more and more and more hi-hats or just adding more and more and more synths. Especially in the transition, this is your perfect place. Take off some hats, take off some synths, add something different, or let people miss that synth so that when you bring it back, it will make people really enjoy it. So try to avoid your track like just a triangle, more and more tracks coming in. Make it more like coming in here, a bit taking off a little bit here, coming in a bit more here, taking off a bit, so that make it less linear and more enjoyable. The next super flag is actually having out of key elements in your track without realizing it. There are, for example, genres, especially like the main room or industrial techno that you can use any key or any notes, doesn't really matter, because that genres are very aggressive, and those like out of key notes adds up to the feel and the vibe, and that out of keys they actually makes the ambience. But if you're making, for example, a regular deep house track and then you have suddenly out of key vocals or the pads or the kicks, it really makes the track really dissonant. And even though listener not maybe realizing it at first glance, they have this dissonant feeling, that kind of hidden hate to the track. So I will start with the kick. This one is really easy to do as well, especially in the beginning when you don't even realize that there's actually a key to your kick. I exaggerated a bit so that I have a kick with a very long tail. That means that that tail is probably a single note or a single key. In this case, I am having from my sample pack, calling a kick, G, and this track is actually using the F sharp, so that we are just one note above the root note, and it's really hard to hear. I'm gonna just solo the bass and the kick. Try to see if you can feel what is wrong with the kick. Let me do it this way. And this oftentimes becomes even more pronounced when you add the melody, because when you add the melody, the brain starts to unconsciously like decipher the key or the tune of this track. So when you hit something out of key, it becomes even easier to spot that out. Let me add the melody. I know even now, it's really hard to pinpoint what the problem is. It sounds okay almost. But let me just transpose it half semitone and try to feel how we suddenly, that tension, this weird feeling disappears in the body, and suddenly everything feels right. Let me do it on the go so that you can feel a bit more. First, the wrong note. Switching. Wrong note. Switching back. Suddenly it feels much more stable, much more like a better feeling in the body. If you are not really sure how you can spot this one out, just try to at least understand in which key you are writing your track and just use a tuner. I have a detailed explanation of how you can use the tuner in my low end tutorial. I go a bit more detailed there as well. Basically, you use a tuner here. Take a look at the note. Now it says around F sharp, but in the beginning it was G. So that you can spot that out. The other thing that you can do also, you can take a look at the EQ or spectrum and try to figure out this like bump in your kick. So that will be most of the time your root note. And once you have that, you can transpose it. But the other easy thing to miss is actually the pads. Especially pads oftentimes have a lot of reverbs and delays in it, so the sounds get a bit mushier and it's easier to slip through a one note in between and you are not really aware that it's happening. In this case, I have this pad sound. And we have G here again. Do you feel how this distracting you? But when you put it into the track, it gets really harder. Right there. It's like, what is happening? What? And then disappears and you're not aware of what happened. So be careful about those small slip throughs. What you can do, Ableton 11 has this already option there. You can just pick the key and then it shows you all the available notes, so that easier to avoid this mistake. But if you don't know, at least learn the practical music theory so that you don't make this kind of mistakes in your tracks. The other mistake, and this happens really a lot for some reason, I don't know, I think people are scared to tune the vocals, the out of key vocals, and this is a really deadly mistake, because if you use a vocal that are out of key, you will get this stem like bum, this guy cannot produce, even though maybe it's a kind of tiny mistake that you made and everything else in the track is really top notch. This really kills the track if you make the mistake. And how does it sound? For example, we are in the, again, G here, and of course you don't go do mistake like this, right? Because it's obvious. But when you have something a bit more relative, let's say the third, something like this, it gets harder to spot. Obviously something is wrong, or it doesn't feel right. Let me put it back and the original F sharp and see what happens now. Suddenly it feels right. Like that. Be really careful with your vocals if you don't know how to tune a vocal. There are easy ways and hard ways. The easy way is like, or the hard way is just you take every word in your vocal and put a tuner on top of that and tune it separately. Easy way is using sign tools like auto tuner or maybe Melodyne, which shows you all the keys so that you can see the notes. But there's also another deadly mistake to avoid, I would say. that was it. So if you see one of those flags, just remember this video and take a closer look and remember what I said. But other than that, I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope you learned something, and I will catch you in the next one. Goodbye.